Welcome to Property Careers Prospector School online. This is where we introduce you to a foothold inside the market. Today's session being session F115. It's the 15th. A new little format here where we introduce you to what's going on around the traps. To begin with, I want to talk about what's happening today. We are going to be very much focused on the sales inquiry log. Now, I know inside a foothold we talk about getting presence out in the marketplace, and that's not been taking a backseat by any means whatsoever. But for a lot of you that are actually suffering the downside of lockdown and everything that's associated with it, there is an opportunity that can be afforded to you right now for you to still be highly productive inside the market that you're operating in. So more on that in just a second as I start to explain it. We've had some resounding success out there with a lot of our sales associates that are working in tandem with a high performance professional, in that most of them are now chasing down a record month in listings and sales. And this record month is being basically linked to us chasing inquiry that we already have in. Now, I know that the lockdown might have presented some sort of frustration to you all, and I openly say that, you know, if like I can say here in New South Wales that they're telling us that it's over at the end of this month, but that is speculation. It could actually carry on from there. So we have to assume that this could be the case. And you've got to just tackle the notion of how do you push forward with productivity despite the fact that you've got these obstacles in your way. And I don't care if you move all the way through. So some of you might be feeling, I know in Sydney, there might be one or two of you that are in the local government areas where you just can't move from home and feeling a little bit hopeless about that. Well, I disagree, because I think that you can still look at the opportunity that presents, and you don't have to look too far to look at some areas where it's actually far harder. I go down to Victoria, for example, and their lockdown status at the moment is such that you definitely can't show houses. You definitely can't run open for inspections, but even worse, you can't do listing presentations. Yet we've got clear-cut examples of our team members not only still showing properties, whether it be online or at least keeping buyers in the mix, and of course listings that are occurring. I have one here in Sydney just this week, first listing presentation online. Congratulations to Sean Donovan out there at Hill and Vatiri Property. He was successful in his presentation, not just online, but also, you know, no discount in and around fee, pushed that up, and of course, marketing investment and everything that went with it. And again, yes, it's a new medium, but you've just got to look at how you project that forward. And that's actually the theme that we're pushing in and around sales trainer. So those that are moved up into the traction stage, sales trainer mentor, very much focused on the listing presentation and how you can still engage active property sellers moving forward in and around lockdown restrictions and COVID. Then, of course, the other thing that we want to look at is property marketer. Those of you that are supporting high-end professionals, one of the things they take their eye off, and I implore you to push heavily on this, is the advent of accolades. That we have this inside a property marketer, and building up your recommendations and then being able to distribute those out. Never forget this, and it's something that if you're relatively new to the game, certainly at the sales associate level, that you need to learn. If you say something, a prospect more than likely is going to doubt it, but if it's said about you, it's totally believable. And there's no better way for us to exploit this than through the use of written recommendations, testimonials. We call these accolades They sit inside the property marketer suite, and I implore you on the back end of your sales professional, and as soon as you practically can, to build your accolades up and be distributing those out into the marketplace. And I know a lot of you might be saying there are platforms like Rate My Agent and these recommendation platforms, which I fully support and I think they're fantastic, but not in the vein of prospecting, because those platforms, if you utilize those to prospect, to bring active property sellers in, they're going to come into your area and then they're going to be presented with your competition. So you can accidentally, be promoting your competition at the same time as promoting yourself. I'm not fearful of this, but why give them free publicity when there's no need to? And you can use the accolades platform independently. The two-view platform, this is another one that's been extraordinary. This can be utilized inside of prospecting. I'll get to that when I talk about how you can keep in touch. And this is important in and around the sales inquiry log. And then, of course, listing pad. Well, this is something that's got more to do with sales professionals and their business and them being out there running listing presentations, which we'll eventually get to. Of course, if you're one of those people that are interested in that, jump on to Sales Trainer List and Sell online, have a look at what's happening there, and we'd love to see you on board with the training that sits in and around it. Today's session, I want to talk about the sales inquiry log. And as I mentioned, we've got lots of our real estate rock stars and which is of course is our peak performance professionals, and many of them, almost all of them in fact, have working with them in tandem a sales associate, and those sales associates are involved in the PC3M, the Property Careers Monitor, Manage and Mentor program. And one of the things that we talk about with sales inquiry is understanding how the phases work. And so often I see in and around prospecting that salespeople do address incoming listing inquiry. The mistake they make is not understanding that insofar as property sellers go, now we call it sales inquiry log. I'm just as a reiteration from a previous episode here, in understanding how sales inquiry works, where the sellers are, and how to process that sales inquiry to get the optimum conversion of active property sellers out of it. You need to understand in a reverse engineered fashion how that works. So we say that active property sellers go through 4 phases. This is a quick recap from what we said before. The first phase for active property sellers is once they've hit their motive, they then decide to research the market in direct correlation to their own property, trying to figure out what its value is and whether or not this value that they will derive should they decide to sell the property will allow them to fulfill their motive to get on with their plans. So it's during this phase they're not receptive to any form of prospecting. Little wonder then when salespeople are prospecting through sales inquiry and talking to people in that immediacy, given that this research phase takes a minimum of 4 weeks to as long as 12 weeks. And invariably, whilst they're doing this research, you're going to come into contact with them in the first 4 weeks or as long as 12 weeks, and they're not receptive. And, for their point of view, quite often they pose as buyers. So now comes the second phase. We've got a list inquiry coming in. We've got people attending our open for inspections. We've even got them inquiring via the internet and perhaps not leaving their mobile telephone number, but only their email address, because they're not buyers, they're sellers, and they don't want the verbal contact. They just want the information around that property, what it's available for, what it might have sold for, what accommodation, that sort of stuff it had, so they can run comparisons with their own. So as long as this data is being collated, and you'll find in most of your real estate agencies that you work in, it should be, and you can go back, especially as Sean Donovan from Hill and Vatiri shared with me the other day, if you could just focus on individual properties and you can corral all the inquiry, well, then it tells you that if most of the inquiry is for an area and that becomes or happens to be inside your service area, then the likelihood of you coming across an active property seller that's in your service area is dramatically increased. But I'm also going to share with you why we're missing so many because of the way we're actually handling that inquiry. But to begin with, you need to source these inquiries. Now, I can tell you with one of our other, Courtney Fern from the Coronas Group, she's up there supporting one of our real estate rock stars, Lincoln Tatnell, and she is focusing exclusively on sales inquiry right now. So in the service area and off the back of the listings that they have, they've got some 1,600 inquiries they're focused on just this month alone. Now let's have a look at it. Their goal is to list roughly 15 properties, or at the very least, get a listing presentation every single day. Now, I'm happy to report that they are meeting that criteria as we speak. They are getting a listing presentation in every day. And when you reverse engineer it, they're focused exclusively on the past sales inquiry, and her prospecting has commenced from those sales inquiries that are at least 4 weeks old. You see, because phase 2 is when the active, when an active property seller has researched the market, the moment they've satisfied themselves that the value of their property is greater than or equal to the amount of money they're going to need to get on with whatever plans they have, they immediately become receptive. So if you are calling them during this phase, utilizing the right dialogue, you are definitely going to be able to identify them. The danger, of course, is don't push too hard because you are likely to lose them. And so it is, I'm just going to show you here right now where that failing is actually occurring. So if you look at the dialogue that most real estate agents use, and I rely on this, I've got to tell you this right now, I rely on the fact that what my competition is doing and saying is such that it is not conducive to that active property seller wanting to do business with them. And even if it is, it sets up a premise that's not of a strong advantage to that competitor. And if I come in with my regime, so long as I'm retaining contact consistently and constantly, and don't panic, I'm not talking about ringing people 2 or 3 times a week. I think that's the wrong way to go about it. But I'm formulating a relationship on the right basis. That relationship is founded around professionalism, and professionalism is consistent or synonymous with the word care. So it is that this is how I engage these people in the first place. And I'm just going to walk you through this very, very quickly so that you understand how it works and give you the dialogue and explain precisely what it is that I'm doing. So the first thing is that I get hold of all the sales inquiry for a particular property that is in that area. I hoping that was, that inquiry is at least 4 weeks old. So it's probably from one that has sold or even came to the market and has managed somehow to stay on the market for that period of time. So I'm sourcing that inquiry for the 4-week mark and longer, to as long as probably 12 weeks. At the 12-week mark, it does start to get a little bit long in the tooth and the conversion ratios drop fairly dramatically. But you get this right within that window, the 4 to 12-week mark, those sellers are actually there. Now, I've had a lot of people come back to me and say that they're not finding those conversion numbers, which is 1 in 5. And I'm saying it's not that they're not there, it's what you're doing and saying and how you're handling them through the process. So the typical agent, just back to it, qualifies, so calls up, talks to them about whether they've found something to buy, and then says, do you have to sell your property before you, in order to buy this new one? And they kind of say yes. Some of them might say, we're not willing to put our property on the market until we sell this one. But the agent starts pushing, and usually that premise is pushed around. Have you had anyone come down and give you an idea on price? Then they push, push, push. So that invariably they're going down on the premise of offering a, inverted commas, valuation, which I believe is fraught with problems anyway. And the premise of just listing it to get the property sold. This is only half the equation. And I believe there where this is coming up short, because sellers are running the assumption that their property will sell fairly readily. They're running another weird assumption, which is everyone's going to get the same price. So when they do need someone, they are invariably still choosing them based upon the price they quote and the fee they charge. So as long as you guess how many marbles they got in the jar and your fees are fairly competitive, or in some cases discounted, they might jump on board with you. Now, I'm going to show you how to change this in its entirety. So if you are taking notes, I'm just going to give you the rundown on how you should be addressing this inquiry. So of course you call up, you use the appropriate dialogue, and the first phase is to qualify whether they're buying, selling, or both. Now, once we are able to qualify that they're buying and or selling, or doing both in and around the same transaction, we then move to identify the motive. Don't get all gooey and say, how can I get down? How can I get to a listing presentation? Don't get ahead of it. It's a simple analogy. Those of you who've seen the movie The Castle, this is my latest one that I'm using. There's a little anecdote in there that I think is appropriate metaphorically for this. And that is where Farouk, they're going to go to court, and Farouk can't wait to get the money out on the table to give it to Mr. Kernighan. And he says, here, take my money. And the Kernighan turns around and says, put your money away, Farouk. What is it with wogs and cash? And I say the same thing to you here now metaphorically. Put your aspirations to get the listing presentation, and worse, the listing, away at the moment, and focus on the context of setting up the right relationship with that prospect, with that active property seller, and give of yourself till it hurts. Care about what they're trying to do. Don't get centric to the price they want. Don't get centric to getting the listing. Look after them and focus on their needs, and I believe the listing will come. What you are looking for is not solicitation. You are looking for invitation. So you don't want to solicit that listing presentation. You want to create a relationship to the point that they invite you to come down and give them some advice and lock in on a professional capacity as a lister. So I say it's pretty simple. So qualify, then identify the motive. This is quite simple, and I'll show you how we do this in dialogue. Then when you get onto the motive, expand on the motive. So the dialogue, as you'll soon see, is where are you coming from? Where are you moving to? And make all of your conversation around that. From that conversation, and it may not happen in the first call, but from that conversation, you can then move to advice, not information around price. Give them an alternate view on how they could be making a mistake with focusing on buying rather than moving. You know, I had one of my people just the other day, again, it was Sean actually, who was talking to someone, and he said, it's just fantastic when I say to people, you know, have you ever gone window shopping and you don't have the money in your pocket to buy, and it's hard to find and it's not that encouraging, but when you do have the money and you're ready to buy and you go out shopping, do you always find what you want? Do you always come back with full bags? And they said, yes. I said, this is the same in a listing, same when it comes to selling your house. If you've got yours sold, you know you have a buyer, you know you're in a position to make the yes decision, and you go out looking, you invariably find something. Now, I think this is the same thing, but that doesn't mean that by putting your property on the market and listing it, that this becomes an obligation for you to sell to someone else. All it becomes is an opportunity for you to get out there and see what's available. We will never let you sell and be homeless if you haven't found, or if you haven't been able to satisfy your motive at the other end. Listing is not selling. And there's lots of dialogue that sits around that. So you can move to that next phase, which is advice. Then you can move to the product, the presentation, what you're offering, the marketing you do, all those sorts of things. And hopefully that will then create the invitation for them to get you to come down and have a chat to them on how it works. And of course, if you're supporting a salesperson, you can create that opportunity by mentioning them and giving them a little push in the right direction. So here is the dialogue, and I want you to understand this is exactly what I'm doing. It fits inside that framework, and I'll just reiterate that. Qualify, identify, motive, advice, product, presentation. That's the sequence that I'm looking for. You can move quickly through it, dependent upon how good it works. But I've got to tell you, those professionals that I've got that are utilizing this framework and are demonstrating care, they're the ones that are coming back to me and saying, you know what, the other day I had someone, they invited me down, next thing I got a listing and I wasn't even expecting it. Because they were focused on helping people, because they were focused on keeping the communication up, they're winning opportunities. It's that old thing, the harder I work, the luckier I get. If you're not engaged and you're not making these calls, if you're not following up sales inquiry log, you're never going to find these sellers. But there is a high propensity inside that sales inquiry log if you process these people the right way. And when you happen across someone who is selling, you utilize that conversation the right way, you are going to get loads of listings coming your way. Here's the dialogue. It's relatively simple. I'll give you the framework and show you how it breaks down. When I'm calling the sales inquiry log, the first thing I do is when the person, the prospect answers the phone on the other side, I just say, good afternoon, it's Mark Dwyer calling from Catch and Kill Your Own Real Estate. That's a bad one. Good afternoon, it's Mark Dwyer calling from Shire Real Estate. And then I say, sorry to bother you. Always apologize for the call. It's a bother. And you want something that they're not necessarily giving. So it's that great Aussie and or New Zealander euphemism. It's culturally how we are. If you apologize for calling, it's typically okay to have made that call. But if you don't and you've interrupted something, it's annoying. Don't let go of all those other rules that we have. Do not let the phone ring more than 5 times. You know, if you're knocking on a door, after 30 seconds, leave, speak clearly and briskly, apologize for calling. That's how we set up the framework of the call. So I apologize, sorry to bother you. I then state the nature of the inquiry. So first things first, apologize for calling, state the nature of the inquiry. You came to an open for inspection of ours back in whatever month. So it's going to be at least 4 weeks, or 4 weeks ago. So it'll be last month, maybe the month before. Or you came to an open for inspection, sorry, I just said that one. Or you called off of a sign of ours back in whenever. Or you inquired off the internet, whatever the nature of the inquiry is. Then you just say, have you purchased as yet? This is giving them the assumption that when they inquired, they were operating as a buyer. Have you purchased as yet? They then start to speak. Now, this can range from them talking for a minute or so to them just going, no, or yes, we have. Now, it doesn't matter whether they have purchased, they haven't purchased, or they give you the short story. I just let them speak. I pause. I count to maybe 3. The reason that I do that is I allow their receptors to open. I allow them to move from talking to actually listening. And then I'll say, do you have something to sell? And I'll be nodding my head at the same time. Now, sometimes they'll say, what? Because they don't quite get it. I say, do you have something to sell? The reason that I say something is quite often they could have an investment property. It might be a property that's not in my specific service area, or at least they think it isn't. And they don't, well, if I say, do you have to sell your house? It might not be their house they need to sell. And it could lead to other properties, which could end up being a referral, but at least you're getting the information. So I say, do you have something to sell? Now, the response, the typical one that's coming back that I'm hearing most often at the moment is, well, once we find something to buy, we will be selling ours, but we're not interested in doing anything around that at the moment. And just, there's no need to freak out about that. But what you've just done, if they say, well, when we find something to buy, yes, we will be selling, you've just moved to, you've been through the qualifier, you now know it's an active property seller, move to identifying the motive. So where are you moving from? Or if the property is in the same area, which where you say where you're moving from, and they say Jonestown, and you realize that the property that they've just inquired on is in Jonestown, you can then say, oh, so I take it that you were inquiring on this one back in whenever it was to compare it to your own. Is that right? Or were you looking to buy? And if they say, well, no, we were looking at that one to buy, say, oh, okay, so you're going to be staying in the same area, are you? Now, if not, you say where you're moving from, and that's out of area. Well, you now know that they're selling in some other part of town, and or the world, and they're moving into the area. Doesn't mean that you can't still go on with it. There might be a referral or something else here. But now we know we've not only qualified, but I've identified the motive. Now we can move into identifying the buy, and where are you looking at moving to, and how soon do you need to be there, and just keep the language and everything else centric to that. You may come away from that conversation with not much more than knowing that they are an active property seller and haven't advanced on it at all. This is not a big deal, because then you can start from that call to engage in a whole lot of passive contact that can build up your chances of getting the invitation to come down. Remember, it's not solicitation. You are looking for invitation to come down. Now, of course, if they turn around and they say, yes, we've bought, you can still say, do you have something to sell? They might say, we're already on the market, or we're already sold. Again, this is okay. Congratulate them. You can now strike that one out. Hopefully you can say, where did you buy, what street, what number, get that information you can sit in your database, and you missed out this time, but you might get the opportunity at a later date. Or if they're bought in another area, got nothing to do with it, you just strike them out, and we know not to follow that inquiry up anymore. But once we've identified, you then have that conversation, center it in and around motive. When you get to the end of the call, you can then move in to some passive communication. One of the things that I recommend that you send out almost straight away is some sort of pre-listing kit. Or if you're one of our clients and you're actually dealing with us, you will have the property seller's research guide. To me, that's just the must, that we want to send that out. And then if you're working in tandem with a sales professional, position them around that by getting that property seller's research guide out. I would automatically move them on to an SMS router, so that any results that you and or the team or the office are making are sent to them twice a week about moving people. This is conducive to them seeing your level of activity. This is perfect passive contact. You're not ringing them, you're not badgering them, but it is still positioning it as you as staying in touch. You can then move to sending a newsletter out, or what we call the market roundup, the monthly market roundup. Definitely at some stage we'll send some information on or around buyers. As I've already said, those of you that are in the States where we've got some difficulty around lockdown and we're not allowed to show houses or we're not allowed to get people out, you could send them the 2View platform and show them how they could take their own photographs, put that into their own individual property website should they list with you, and we can still engage buyers on their behalf whilst the lockdown situation persists. There's lots of things that we can do, and then talking about buyers and all that sort of stuff. So please understand, I don't care if you're in lockdown right now, I don't care if you're freed up, but it is spring, and I would be very much focused on capturing the lion's share of the people that are looking to put the property on the market by identifying them first, creating those series of engagement, because the important things to understand is even if you are in lockdown, the future arrives. And when we get to that future, we'll be coming out of lockdown. And it's those active property sellers that have been engaging with a professional that has been focused about demonstrating care and giving them good advice and all the other bits and pieces, that will be first cab off the rank and definitely the agent of preference when it comes to them inviting someone down to give them a listing presentation. My name's Mark Dwyer. You can reach me at Mark with a K at propertycareers.com.au, or you can reach me on +61 410 592 165. And I look forward to catching you next week on Property Careers Prospector School Online.